Okay. Hello, everyone. Here we are. We are continuing with Divine Friendship, and we are going to start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence in these words, Swamiji, that the consciousness that you were sending to those who wrote to you be received now in this moment in all of our hearts. Help us to open ourselves to a new way of looking at life, that we may become deeply attuned to God and Guru, and to move through this world in perfect harmony with their uplifting love for us. Om. Peace. Amen. We are Keshavalus tonight. He had other appointments that had to be kept, but perhaps in some future weeks he will join us for chanting again. So, we are in the middle of a letter in the next to the last section of this book. Section we're in is called Suffering and Death, and the last one before it was, the last one after it is Seek Ye First the Kingdom of God. And the whole section called World Conditions really turned out to be a very valuable entity in itself, which we have pulled out and have posted, calling it Paramahansa Yogananda's Prophecy for the Future. And we're pairing it with a couple of other things I've done. There's only part 1 and part 2 listed. There's a part 3, which I think has not yet been posted. So if you have friends or have a particular interest in that section, but especially you may know people who really want to know what Yogananda said, that whole thing turned out to be one of the most comprehensive discussions I've ever had about all of that. So I think you may find it useful. I hope it helps people. I hope it it stimulates spiritual seriousness and gives people a place to stand in regard to all the uncertainties that we're facing in this world. Fortunately, God is in charge, but we don't always know what He has in mind. And so it takes a lot of self-discipline and energy to keep our consciousness attuned to His. We are in uncertain times now. Master said it will get worse before it gets better. But those of you who've been following these sessions know for certain what I'm talking about. But I think it is a great service to have separated those classes out, and I just wanted you to know about that. So now we're in the middle of a letter that was written in July of 1972. And the section, as I said, is Suffering and Death. And the summary of this letter is bliss is the answer to suffering, and we've read almost all of it. So here are the last 2 paragraphs. When we ourselves know suffering, it is because of wrong actions of the past that have created these thoughts in our minds. We strengthen those karmas when we give in to them. I am the first to say the law of karma is really tough. And it's easy to sort of talk around it and let's see, call upon it when it's convenient, when it just kind of suits our purposes to talk about karma. But the law of karma is inexorable. It's like gravity. It is just a reality of the universe. We can have any opinion we want, but if we pick up something and drop it, it falls to the floor. It doesn't fly to the ceiling, it always falls to the floor. And we can not believe in it, we cannot like it, we can be very upset about it. The law of karma doesn't actually care at all what we say. I mean, the law of gravity, it just does what it does. And the law of karma is exactly the same. It's cause and effect. It's a divine law. Divine because, well, all laws are divine, but it's inspired by God, and it is divine in the sense of it's there to bless us, which is, once we begin to understand that there is a cause and effect to human experience, and that we ourselves are responsible for initiating those causes, and what we have done in the past is simply done. And the force of what we've set in motion is inexorable at that point. It's a boomerang, is how I often think about it. You hurl the thing out, it goes in a big circle. Because of the energy that we put into swinging it, it will come all the way back around. It will come right back to us. We initiate it, we receive it. If there's a lot of force, it can take a while for it to get back to us, but it never breaks its trajectory. This is where it's coming. Now, everything that we've learned and done from the moment when we launched it to the moment when it returns to us has a profound effect on how we receive it. We might be weak and feeble when we throw it out, and then we train ourselves to become very powerful. So by the time it comes back to us, it can whack into us, but it kind of just bounces off. Or we can be weak when we send it out and get weaker and weaker as time passes. So by the time it comes, it smashes into our head and breaks our skull. But the energy of it is exactly, we launch it, we receive it, which means everything that happens is absolutely fair. And that's where it becomes so difficult, because so much in the world appears to be unfair. I mean, there are horrible things happen to seemingly innocent people. And so then when we see those things visited upon innocent people, what the karmic law seems to be saying is that they're not innocent and they're terrible people. That's why terrible things are happening. Now, that is not completely untrue. And of course, that's just devastating. Children and so on. That's why the law of karma has to involve the law of reincarnation, which is to say, just because we've incarnated in a small body, we're not starting over. It's just the next chapter. We start out as children, we grow up through it, but we're born with the whole story. One incarnation is a chapter in a book, and you turn the page, and usually the chapter has a certain conclusion to it. That's why it's written that way. But you turn the page, or you push the button and the screen shifts, whatever you're doing, but you start, and then here's a new chapter. But what happens in the new chapter is determined by everything that happened up until there. Just because you turn the page for a new chapter, you're not starting from scratch. It's not blank. It's that everything that happened up until that point. Now, if you think of it as an exciting movie, which is easy to do if it's not your life, you see how everything plays together, and if it's a good book, gradually everybody learns something and it gets interesting. A good book meaning an uplifted book with higher truth in it. Because the plot is not all the little events that are happening. The plot of human life and of all these incarnations and all this karma, the plot is that Divine Mother loves us, and everything that happens is an expression of her love as she teaches us what actions and attitudes will actually bring us lasting happiness, and what actions and attitudes will bring us ever deeper suffering. And it's very easy when you're a child and your parents, let's say your mother, since we're talking about Divine Mother, your mother is trying to work with you because, hopefully, she's an adult, she knows more about life than you do as a child, and she wants to help you grow up to be successful. Successful in, let's hope it's the best way, successful in understanding where happiness comes from and what causes suffering. A friend of mine, when her son was 5, she was disciplining him in some way that he really didn't like. And he left the room, and then he decided that he really wanted her to know what he thought. And he came back and he said to her, I hate you, you're a terrible mommy, just like children can do because everything is so extreme. I hate you, you're a terrible mommy. Then he delivered the coup de grace and he said, you weren't even my first choice. And my friend, who at that time knew nothing about this teaching, she told me this story when I started talking about various things to do with reincarnation, which I'll explain in a moment. And she got just very interested, you know. She said, well, honey, who was your first choice? He said, a lady in the Philippines, but she was taken. And then, you know, with great drama, he went off into his room to absorb his punishment. So she heard me, my friend heard me, talk about how Master said when a soul is ready to incarnate in the astral world, whenever a couple unites in sexual intercourse, and as it happens, which doesn't happen every time, the sperm and the ovum meet. And Master said that life begins at conception and life begins in that moment. When they meet by divine accident or divine law, it creates a vibration. The result of that male and that female coming together creates a vibration which is consistent with what their combined consciousness will be and what the potential of that incarnation will be. And I'm repeating what Master said, all those souls in the astral world who are ready to incarnate and are in tune with that vibration will respond to that vibration and rush to enter the womb. That's how I heard it described. Rush to enter the womb. Whether that's exactly what Master said or not, I don't know. And he said sometimes more than one will come in at the same time, and then you have twins or other kind of multiple births. And the phrase rush to get in was what my friend started laughing about, because she said her son, even at the age of 5, well, and actually by now, by the time she was talking to me, I think he was college age. This had been an inexplicable moment from years earlier that now made sense. She said he had a personality characteristic, which he would become very interested in something, but then he would always hesitate for a minute and pull back to think about it. So she could see him heading for that womb in the Philippines, but then just pausing for a moment, during which time somebody else rushed into the womb. And he got stuck with her. Apocryphal or true, I can't say from direct experience, except I'm telling you the parts that Master said. But isn't that marvelous? Okay, now let me think what that had to do. Oh, I was talking about the karma that's carried from life to life, reincarnation, the chapter, all of that. Why is the soul in tune with that particular vibration? Because it's not a blank slate. You're not a blank slate. And all of this is explained in great detail in many places, but I would also recommend, I have multiple classes on my YouTube channel, Karma and Reincarnation. Death, dying also, but just type in those words in the little question box, because it's let me say how to say it. It's absolutely invaluable on the spiritual path for your happiness to learn as much as you can about karma and reincarnation, to meditate on it, to work through whatever part of you wants to say, no, this can't possibly be true, whatever part of you argues with it, because it won't serve you to argue with it. And here's the other piece of it. And Swamiji did this once. He was giving this big program in San Francisco. It was 1979. And we rented the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, which is a huge theater. It held about 1,000 people. We had about 600, 700, which was a huge crowd for us at that time. Decades later, when Swami went to India, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds was common. But in the U.S., even to the end, his very last American public appearance here in the Palo Alto area, we had over 1,000 people. But that was very unusual. So that number was huge for that period of time. Might have been closer to 500. But in any case, let's let's see now, where was I going? Yes, he was introducing something that he calls superconscious living, which is this marvelous program. It's a whole series of classes, basically explaining the fundamentals of the spiritual path from a very interesting angle. He wanted it to be a course that would be taught often and regularly, and would be set in its curriculum. So far, no one has picked it up to use it the way he wanted to, but I hope that somebody will in time, because it's a magnificent course. But among the things he was teaching was karma, and in that context, he started talking about what happened to the Jews during what is called the Holocaust, during the Second World War, which is one of the most terrifying and appalling possibilities of karma, because what happened to those people was just beyond human expectation in terms of the evil and the suffering that was deliberately imposed. Now, before I say what Swami said, at a certain point I was invited by an Episcopal priest friend of mine. He lived in Seattle, and I was there giving programs. He invited me to come to his Christian-Jewish dialogue group, which was studying about the Holocaust, because it's a very intense part of modern Jewish history. My friend, the Episcopal priest, thought it would be lots of fun to have his self-realizationist Jewish friend come to this program, and so I was there. It was very interesting because there'd been a series of readings. It was maybe 15 people, probably evenly divided between the Christian and the Jewish. And there'd been a series of readings that they were supposed to do about this experience, and they varied. They were, recommended by the rabbi who was leading it. And one of the readings was by a rabbi, I don't know his name, not someone present, and it said, those years were the shining hour for the Jewish people because it allowed them to put to the absolute most challenging test a fundamental premise of the Jewish religion, which is nothing matters except our relationship to God. And he said everything was taken away, but no one could take away our relationship with God, and it was our opportunity to show the world of what we are made. That's really something for a rabbi to write that. It was very interesting, because to me that was thrilling, and something that on all sides of it I wanted to represent as a self-realizationist who loves Jesus, who grew up in a Jewish family. I felt I was in a position to say something about it. Nobody wanted to talk about that one because it was just too hard. It's just too hard. So it doesn't mean it's untrue. It's just that it takes a lot of courage to go that far, to trust God to that extent, to believe that God's will is always loving and just. So when Swamiji was giving this class, he was using that historical event to talk about the law of karma, which, Swamiji is no coward. He really just marches in there and says what's true, as I've pointed out many times in these letters. And he said what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust, they deserved it. And the whole room went like that. I mean, there was just like this palpable inhalation, this horror. And it was like, even I was like, whoa, Swami, what a thing to say. And of course, after the hubbub, and because it was a hubbub, and then he said, but deserve has two meanings. He said, sometimes you can say, I can't think of anyone who deserved that award more. He's the most wonderful person in the whole group. I'm so glad he was finally recognized. He's such a deserving man, isn't it? And of course, the way we also do it, as we say it in terms of revenge. Boy, he really deserved that, didn't he? And everybody in the room heard it the second way. And Swami was also just trying to get our attention. And Swami talked about the fact, which he seemed to be able to say with authority, that many, many people in those camps became saints from that experience. Because it was exactly as the rabbi said. They really deserved the opportunity to find out of what they were truly made. In the face of so much darkness, to be able to still find the light. Now, most of us are not tested on that level. But philosophically, it has to be true. And I contemplate this a great deal because in our own little life, there are among us people still living who lived through that. There are among us people whose parents or grandparents lived through all of that. There are people in many parts of the world, or soldiers who were captured in Vietnam, or World War II veterans, who go through things that you think are unendurable. And why does it happen? Very, very interesting, isn't it? So Swami says, when we ourselves know suffering, it is because of wrong actions of the past that have created these thoughts in our minds. Now, earlier in this, in an earlier paragraph of this same letter, last week I said, joy and suffering depend entirely on the attitudes of the mind. The poorest beggar has found bliss when his attitude was right. The richest king has found only misery when his attitude was wrong. I believe last week I talked about the beggar who sort of moved around on the little wheeled cart that we all met in Varanasi, who just had the countenance of a saint. And I mentioned the man, and it was from Viktor Frankl's book, who lived in the concentration camp and exist on the same starvation rations as everyone else, but remained robust and healthy because of his consciousness. And his consciousness was entirely, how can I help and serve others? It's very challenging. But Swami just puts it to us. It's wrong actions of the past that have created these thoughts in our minds. We strengthen those karmas when we give in to them. And that to me is very, very powerful, because whenever something I really don't like happens in my life, and regularly things I really don't like happen in my life, I think it's enough that I'm seeing this karma now. I definitely do not want to see it again in a future life. That is a tremendous incentive. Because if I don't learn what it has to teach me, and the only plot to this whole drama is that all our experiences are meant to awaken divine love in our heart and to lift us closer to the bliss that comes with that divine love. And so we can at least try, because that will at least, if it won't eradicate, it will at least weaken. It will at least weaken the karmic pattern that brought us suffering. So, Swami finishes the last paragraph. Dear friend, try to live more in your higher self and with others who, too, have joy in that self. In other words, keep good company. And if you don't have physical companions, then listen to uplifting music and let Swami and Master speak to you, or saints or teachers that you admire. Bring their voices and their vision and their words into your life. Keep the company of those who love God. Meditate more. Thank God for the blessing of loving Him, and even for the blessing of every test He sends you. Truly, it is all His grace in divine friendship. When, Richard Alpert, yes, I think that's his name, the man who became known as Baba Ram Dass, the American man who was the Harvard experimenter with Timothy Leary, who brought LSD, did all those experiments with LSD and really launched that whole wild decade when all of that was popular. But Richard Alpert went to India and became a disciple of Neem Karoli Baba, who was a great yogi who lived there, and he became his disciple and became a very devoted disciple. Richard Alpert was extremely articulate, very, very intellectually brilliant person, a constant stream of creative words, and he would speak all over the country and even all over the world, and he wrote books, and it was a huge spiritual influence on many people. He wrote the book Be Here Now, and which was a very influential book in my, I never read it, but in my era. And about 10 years before he died, I think Richard Alpert was probably a few years older than I. About 10 years before he died, or maybe even longer, he had a terrible stroke. And the stroke paralyzed large parts of his body, made him completely dependent on others for his life. And he developed aphasia. And aphasia is a confusion in the ability to speak. Here's a man who had lived on his words, and all of a sudden now he couldn't speak. And he gradually regained some speech, but never the facility he had. He would have to speak slowly. As I understand, you have to search for words. There would be gaps. I mean, it was about as flipped as you can imagine. And he lived for quite a number of years that way, having other people take care of him and having lost his primary interface with the world. But he had a stroke, but what he started saying was that his guru had stroked him. That's how he put it. My guru stroked me. So he took the whole thing and he just took at the hand of Neem Karoli Baba, just, you would think, oh, my guru stroked me. What a blessing that would be. So he just turned it like that. And then he made a documentary film, which he called Fierce Grace, which all of it was brilliant because he hadn't lost his intelligence, he just lost his interface. His interface with the world had been injured, but not his interior consciousness. Fierce grace. I thought that was, oh my, that is what it's like, isn't it? It's like, it's grace. We know it's grace because everything is grace. Everything is grace. But some of it is pretty fierce. I remember at a time when I was having to face something pretty tricky. And I had a lot of anger. And I wasn't really angry at anybody I could think of, but I just was angry. I finally realized I was really angry at the gurus. I was really mad at them. I was mad at them because it was fierce grace. It was going to take a lot on my part to sort of work my way through this. And I knew I was going to do it. And I knew it would be worth it to do it. But I was so mad that they'd asked it of me. I just was. I was white hot. And that's fine. I mean, in a certain sense, it's a sign of trust to get really mad at the people you love because you know that they understand. And I was angry. There was just no way around it. And now, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, I got over it, of course. Mother Teresa of Calcutta had a wonderful way of expressing that. She said, God will never send you a test greater than he knows you can handle. And then she said, but sometimes I wish Jesus didn't have such a high opinion of me. That's another way to say it, but it's the truth. What do you mean I can handle this? What do you mean this is appropriate? What do you mean this is the right karma for me? I totally disagree, and I would like to speak to your boss. Who's the manager around this place? This is a really, really dumb idea. Have you thought about this? Who do you think I am? Apparently someone I don't think I am. If you can laugh at it, it helps. But it's not funny when it's happening. But it doesn't change the answer. That's why, well, here's Teresa of Avila. When she was, in the last years of her life, she continued to found convents, even though she was her health was very poor and she was, struggling a great deal. And at that time, when she would take her nuns Her nuns were completely cloistered. They just were never out in the public. So she would take nuns from convents that already existed, at least a seed core of them, and wherever she felt guided by God and a lot of other circumstances, they would go and establish a new convent. But to travel, they had to travel in sort of in purda, although they wouldn't have called it that, in covered carriages and things like that. And times were hard, by horseback, by carriage, and they had to ford a river. And Teresa was on a horse in some way or another in one of the carriages, I'm not sure exactly. But she was just herself, but she goes into this river, and whatever conveyance she was riding on, the water was too swift. She was poured out into this freezing water. She was tumbled about on the rocks. And then she suddenly finds herself on the other bank. So she's safe, but it's just been a tumultuous, terrifying ride for her. And she gets to the opposite bank, and Jesus is there. Because she saw Jesus. Jesus appeared to her. It wasn't just vision. Jesus manifested in front of her often. In the convent where she lived, she was often called to the parlor, which is how they had for the cloistered nuns, where the nun sat on this side of the grate and the visitor sat on the other, and she would have to speak because she did so much work and was so well known as her life developed. But sometimes she would be talking to a visitor and she would say, "I'm sorry, I have to go now because someone is waiting for me in my cell." And often it was Jesus, literally, waiting for her in her cell. And she would go back and he would be there with her, like he appeared to St. Francis also. He was completely with her in the present time. So she's tumbled off and thrown up on the rocky bank and wet and cold and all this. And Jesus says to her, "Don't worry, my dear. This is how I treat all my friends," he says to her. And she looks up at him and said, "Oh, my Lord, that's why you have so few." Just perfect, isn't it? This is how I treat all my friends. Well, that's why very few people want to be friends with you. And that's the truth, isn't it? Very few people, out of 1,000, one seeks. That's what the Gita says. Out of 1,000 who seek, one actually finds God. Master did say, quote, "Our percentage is higher." But he didn't say how much higher. But the point is, most people, it's just too hard. And that's fine. We have as much time as we want. We're allowed to experiment and see if the law of karma is really true or not. We can rebel against it. We can say, what do they know? I'm going to do it my way. And we'll just see how that works. But after a certain point, we've done enough of that. And it's a mysterious reality. I can't explain how or why, but it just comes to the point where you just know. You just know. I had a period of time where I had these odd dreams, this odd pattern of a dream. It wasn't the same dream. In the dream, they're very, very vivid dreams. It would always be just after I had done something that had completely wrecked my life. Either something immoral, something irresponsible, something dishonest. It wasn't even like the event itself was like I knew what it was, but something would have happened in which I had behaved dishonorably. But the dream would always be, oh, I've ruined my life. And just this horrible, heart-sick feeling that my consciousness had run out of my control and now I'd ruined everything. Oh, it just makes me so sad to think about it. I had this dream maybe 3 or 4 times, but it was more than once. And then I would wake up, and I would wake up with, oh my God, I was so relieved that it was in the past. That's how I felt about it. I felt like the dreams were real. And they were dreams that were reminding me of where I'd been and emphasizing to my consciousness, be careful. I can't say that I was being particularly tempted in any way related to the dreams. So it didn't feel like it was a warning But it was just a reminder, just a reminder. You've struggled and been through a lot to get to this point. Honor where you are. Be conscious of where you are. It went on for, a few, and then it went away. It wasn't something I've lived with for a long time. But interesting, isn't it? But I could feel it. I could feel it so deeply. Oh, that's how you learn, isn't it? You suffer. You do something that you think is a good idea, and then it really turns out not to be. Maybe once is enough, but more likely we have to repeat it. Because if the force was strong enough to push you once, it's probably going to push you again. And then finally, before you make the mistake, you already know the consequence, and the knowledge of that consequence is sufficient to keep you from doing it. And that's why we stop. It stops working for us. And therefore, whatever tough karmic lessons come to us, they're coming to us because we're ready to face the consequences and to learn one very simple thing. Don't do it, it's not worth it. In my early years at Ananda, when I was I guess less capable of directing my energy consistently in countless ways, there were people that I knew who were just so not influenced by things that influenced me, things that would influence me to become off-center or to make wrong choices. And I never made horrible choices, but I made some pretty silly ones in retrospect. But there were other people who just weren't tempted by those things. And I just would like, oh, I wish I could be like that. I wish I could learn these lessons. But of course, 50 years later, I've learned a number of them. God willing, I've learned a lot of them. But I don't want to be presumptuous, so we'll see, won't we? All right, let's go on. This was written in 2001, June of 2001, and it's called A Play of the Divine. Your appeals have deeply touched me. Just to say, I have no context for this letter at all. All I know is what I'm reading here. Your appeals have deeply touched me. I've been praying for your dear sister, and am praying now that she pull through her operation. Please know that I am no miracle worker, but my prayers sometimes are answered, and I would not deny prayer in your sister's case because of lack of confidence in my own power. After all, God's alone is the power. Isn't that just an interesting thing in itself? Swami very often would say, I will pray for you. And it sort of becomes it's part of the Ananda culture to say that we will pray for each other and to pray for each other. We have prayer councils. Every one of our community has prayer councils, and people who volunteer especially to receive prayer requests and so on. And Swami is explaining here how this works. I am no miracle worker. It's not saying, I will pray and thus will be the result. He doesn't say that. But my prayers sometimes are answered, and I would not deny prayer in your sister's case because of lack of confidence in my own power, because it is God's power that heals. So Swamiji puts it in the right context for all of us to be able to pray for one another. It's not a question of my having the power. It's that I ask God to use His power. I ask Divine Mother to use her compassionate power. And then, of course, it's up to her to do it. There is a saying of Swami's that I only came across in the last few years, although it's existed for many years, and it's interesting to me. It was even Swami, when he first went to India in 2003, among products that he was making to get the teachings out and also to earn a little money for the ashram, he took some of the beautiful photographs he'd taken. He had 15,000 photographs he'd taken over the years, and he combined them with sayings he had from various books and so on, and made these pretty posters. And one of them was hanging in his office, in his house, in the community we had at that time in Pune. The land is still there, and it's still a retreat area to some extent, I'm not sure. But the house and the office and the poster on the wall existed for many years, and I frequently visited his house and was in his office, and strangely, I never saw it. And so when I was there after he passed and I saw these words, they struck me very deeply, and it took me a long time even to understand them. I'm not going to say it probably word for word, but this is what he said. When we are able to offer to God, joy is ours when we are able to offer to God the griefs of others. And if that's not exact, it's pretty close. I knew it was important. I had no idea what it meant, but I knew it was important, and I kept it for several years. I even wrote it and put it on my computer, the little stand, my little office, so that I was seeing it every day, because the griefs of others are a very, very difficult part of life. If you have a tender heart at all, I mean, one's own griefs are less difficult, because at least I find it so. Because if it's my own grief, I know that it's for my karmic good, because I can use my own willpower to help overcome it. But if it's someone else, how do I help them? And we suffer so much when we see what everybody has to go through. This is why the law of karma is so tough. So I just had that for years, several years, trying to understand it. And I was on the phone with Devarshi, who's one of the heads of the monastery, the monks' community in India, in Chandigarh now. And I just mentioned it to him, and I mentioned to him, I don't quite know what it means. Devarshi said, oh, I know exactly what it means. And I was just so like, really? Do tell me. And he said, if you're a little child, he grew up, I think there were 5 children in his family, including a twin brother. And I think his mother was very kind, so he kind of had this, he could pull this out. He said, if one of your sisters or your brother, one of your siblings, is very unhappy and has a problem, and you're just a child and you don't know how to solve it, you will go to your mother and say, Mommy, Mommy, Sissy is having this problem, my brother is having this problem. And once you have told your mother, you know it's going to be taken care of. And so you feel joyful about it because you know the solution is at hand. Isn't that just so touchingly wonderful? And I've thought about it a great deal since then. Oh, if I pray to Divine Mother and tell Divine Mother that, this woman's sister is very ill and having this operation, and she's frightened, she doesn't know what to do. I don't know what the circumstances are, but you can imagine it. She has young children, what if she dies? She needs to be strong for her husband who doesn't have health himself. She's a single mother and she's the sole breadwinner. I mean, make lots of stories, because all the stories are true. And you tell your Divine Mother to take care of it, because what can I do? Then you can feel totally confident in your heart that the situation will be taken care of. Not that she will live, not that she will recover necessarily, because often mother does things that the child doesn't understand, but the mother knows they are exactly what the child needs. So we pray. We pray God's will be done. One of the prayers that I find very helpful is, whatever you're trying to teach them, Lord, help them to learn it. Because that's a way of acknowledging 2 things. I'm acknowledging that I don't necessarily know what's going on. And just because I want a certain result doesn't mean that God wants a certain result, or that even my desire for that result is in the best interest of this person. What I really want for this person is for them to be able to face and overcome the karma. Just like Swami said, that the more this comes to us because of our past actions, and when we face into it with courage, then we can triumph over it. What else would I want? Why would I want them to escape from a necessary lesson only to have it come up later? So whatever you're trying to teach them, however, my prayer is help them to learn it. And sometimes the prayer has been, and fast, because we're all getting pretty tired of this whole thing, whatever it might be, because you can speak to your mother like that. You can speak to your father like that. You can speak to your guru like that. He knows your heart anyway. I remember when I tried, as Swami said, to put on a good face and look like a good disciple, which it was a particular situation that went on for about a year. And I was always trying to affirm the right attitude and respond as if I had it all together when I was really just disintegrating. One of the many things that I did that was not the brightest thing to have done. And after a year or so of it, it was getting to be kind of ridiculous. And that at that point, Swami said to me, "You never fooled me. You tried to, look like you had the right attitude, but you never fooled me." And I fortunately, my response was, "Oh my gosh, what a colossal waste of time and energy." Yeah. And from that point, I tried to be more sincere, including, "I don't like this. Why is this happening? But thy will, not mine, be done." But I'm not happy about it. That's even Jesus. "Let this cup pass from me," he said. "But thy will, not mine, be done." So I've told you my opinion. I'm not hiding it from you. I'm not acting as if I think this is a good idea. This is what I think. But thy will, not mine, be done. Whatever it is you're trying to teach them, help them to learn it. And that to me, I've been able to pray that very sincerely. So I'm not saying, get well, spare this, make this happen. But it's clear that I want the suffering to resolve into wisdom and bliss. And please, God, soon. So, remember always that this is all a play of God's. As Divine Mother said to Master once when he was going through a severe test, she said, "Dance of life and dance of death. Know that these come from me, and as such, rejoice." Now that really pushes it, doesn't it? Why would we be unhappy with what God gives us? What do we want in this world except what God gives us? Everything that comes is a gift from God. I sometimes joke, how could it be possible that everything in creation is an interrelated, perfectly harmonious expression of Divine Mother's love for us, except this little event, this little thing that happened to me this year. Everything else is in perfect harmony, but this little spot, no, this is happening outside of God's will. What are the chances? Not very likely. But we have to really bring up a lot of courageous, clear energy to clarify our thinking and be able to look right at why this is happening to me. And I don't just mean, oh, I'm such a terrible person. No, why is this happening to me? In other words, Lord, what are you trying to teach me? And why am I having so much trouble learning it? For me, it's always a very simple question. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? And my fears are not always stupid, but they're always, in the end, just, how does he put it? It's all a play of God. So even if I'm frightened, it's still all a play of God. But I have to get over it. Joy comes only when we understand to our depths that this is all Divine Mother's play in divine friendship. Okay, February 12th, 1991. She died serving God. What better way to go? That's the summary. Dear friend, and I don't know, I was trying to remember, I don't know who this was for. Let's say 91. No, there was a... I don't know. I'm thinking of a few. There was only once in a while in Ananda's 50-year history has there been a sudden, shocking passing of someone. There was a woman who was a single mother with 2 young sons who died extremely suddenly from toxic shock syndrome, actually. I think she got it from a tampon, if you can believe that. Somehow or another, something happened, and she just took ill and died, just like that, out of nothing. I don't think that's who this was. I only just said that out loud. Most of the time, death was anticipated. And that's not to say that getting cancer or some other fatal disease at a young age is enjoyable or easy to adjust to, but only once in a while has someone, her case, and then another recent one in Italy, where there was an actual explosion in an apartment and somebody died. But it's very rare in Ananda's history for that to happen. Okay, this person writes, Swami writes, "Thank you for your interesting letter and for the copy of the speech given about our friend. If indeed she is liberated, what does her death matter? Death comes to all, but liberation, spiritual liberation, to very few. So if whatever it was that took this person's life, a woman, if that final act was what she needed to finish all her karma and become spiritually free, how could you possibly think of that as anything but a divine grace?" It's just interesting to think about. Do I really accept that she is liberated? It is not for me to judge, Swami says. Certainly, her God-centered life brought great divine blessings to her, and she died serving God. What better way to go? So Swami's looking at this like whatever this death was, there may have been, the implication here is that's why I thought of that woman who died suddenly. But she was probably much earlier than this. So who knows? It could be anywhere in the world by 1991. And she died serving God. What better way to go? Meaning her life was a huge success. She was right where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. And if her life ended at that point, what better point to be in your life except right where you should be doing exactly what you should be doing? Still, she was dear to me, Swami writes. Because Swamiji and all great masters do not reject the human in affirming the divine. So on one hand, she died serving God, what better way to go? But she was very dear to me, meaning I'm sorry she's gone now. When Master spoke at the funeral for Sister Gyanamata, who was his most advanced woman disciple, and he said when she died that she became a siddha. She was completely free. She was a fully liberated being. Master watched her merge into the infinite light. I can only repeat those words. I don't know what it means. But when he gave her the eulogy at her funeral, he wept. He's a God-realized master. He's beyond all human suffering. And he spoke of her as being fully liberated. But he was also human. And in the human world, his dear sister was no more. And he spoke so movingly of her and their friendship, and how never again would they be Yogananda and Sister Gyanamata together. That it was a unique moment in all of eternity, and now it was over. And it had been such a beautiful thing, he wept for it. And he spoke of missing her. She won't be here with me anymore. He lived less than a year afterwards, maybe only a few months. It signaled the end of his life as well. I can't remember what the timing was, but they died very near each other. And he wept for her. So when Swami says, still, even though her death was as God willed it, she was very dear to me. I am also sorry that she had to die so young. Her life was a blessing to many people. And this is part of what we have to learn as spiritual beings, that we can't become spiritual at the expense of our humanity. Swami was fond of saying, to be infinite means also to be infinitesimal. To be omnipresent means that you're not only infinite, but you're also infinitesimal. And I've always been so touched by that. You know, Master was the great overarching spirit. He was the extraordinary avatar. His consciousness was everywhere. And then I see something like a little dragonfly or a ladybug. And I think everything is part of the divine, equally part of the divine. And the man of God can project himself into any reality and experience it equally. It's a beautiful way to think about it. So now the next two letters are two women whose husbands have died. This one was from the year 2003. I have no context for this. Swami writes to her, I've heard you are feeling a bit low. It's understandable. But I know you don't like that feeling. So may I suggest something? Make a greater effort to meditate longer and deeper. Don't seek instead to distract the mind. Now, of course, that's often what we do, isn't it, when we get sad? We just try to get through the sad mood by doing something that distracts us from it. The power to rise comes from within, from superconscious contact, not from pretending everything's all right and just soldiering on. Devote yourself more now to making God your companion. Isn't that just beautiful advice? You know, try to truly transcend, not merely distract. Swami often put this image forward, sometimes put this image for it. We sometimes think of karma as a wave. And if you've ever been at the ocean where there's waves, you know, sometimes big waves come in and they can knock you out, knock you down. You sort of can be wading out into the surf, and then all of a sudden the surf is bigger than you are. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bigger than your head, but it's bigger and stronger than you, and it knocks you down. Now even when big waves are coming in, there's always a point where they gradually lose their energy, and finally they just dissipate into the sand. So when a karmic wave of energy comes, if that wave is, let's just use a physical image, if we're 2 inches tall and the wave is a foot tall, we'll walk into it and it'll dissolve. It'll be too big for us. It'll knock us over. Now, the image of the ocean, the waves move too quickly, but there's the karmic wave, and it's twice the size that we are. So Swamiji's advice to us, which sometimes we can handle better than others, is meet it at the crest, is how he puts it. And we meet it at the crest, it knocks us over because our relationship with God is only 2 inches tall and the karmic wave is 12 inches tall. So if we can meet it at the crest, that means to exert all our energy and concentration and make our unity with God bigger than the karmic wave. Because all karma is the same. It's something. And at first, we're very interested in all the details, our past lives and who did what to whom and who's really responsible and why this is happening, all these things. It's all very interesting at the beginning. Gradually, it's not interesting at all. That all karma is generic. It's something perfectly designed for each of us as individuals that has the capacity to cause us to lose our joyful connection with the divine, because it's big enough to sweep us off our feet and just tumble us around in anger and in despair and in blame and in self-blame and in hopelessness and in fear, all the incredible things that come out of us when that wave of energy smacks into it. But of course, if we're strong, and let's use the image of the beach again, if you're a little child of 6 and you're standing next to your grown father, the same wave can come in and it will knock you off off your pins and onto your back, but it'll just strike the bigger person and just strike them and then go away. So Swami says to us, when the karmic wave comes, try to meet it at the crest, which is the karma is this big. Try to make yourself bigger than that with whatever willpower and devotion you can muster. And the closer you can come to doing that, you can dissolve the karma completely. Now, what mostly happens is we keep, as if the karma were chasing us up the beach, we just keep backing up and backing up, enduring, just waiting, because over time the energy of it begins to dissipate. This is the strangest thing about grief and sadness, which is time has a very strange effect on it. Strange meaning other more recent events begin to crowd in front of it. It hasn't changed, but it's become covered over by other events. So we outlast it, and then we think we've overcome it. But we've actually overcome it when it finally got to be half an inch tall, and my 2 inches now is bigger. So I think I've overcome it. But I haven't really, because it was 12-inch karma. And I just outlasted it until it got smaller than me. That's not the same as actually facing into it and succeeding. Now, it's better than not. But just to distract ourselves until enough time has passed and that we don't hurt as much is not necessarily freedom, because the next 12-inch wave is going to knock us over if we haven't gotten any bigger. So this is what Swami is saying. This person has been struck by the loss of a spouse. Don't just try to distract yourself from it. A friend of mine whose husband died, and this is not that person because it was much earlier, and she had to work through a lot of grief. Her husband was ill, but he died very suddenly, so she didn't have much warning. She did not know that he was close to death. She thought he was going to recover. And let's see, people would say to her, "I'm so sorry you lost your husband." And she said, "I didn't lose him." She said, "He's not like a wallet that I left in the department store." She said, "I know exactly where he is, but he's not here." It was just sort of one of her ways of saying that. And there's lots of issues with grief, and of course, a common one that was so touching when she would say it. She said, "All I have left of him is my sadness over his absence." She says, "If I stop being sad, he'll really be gone." And that was a very insightful thing that she had to say. All I have is my grief. If I give that up, then he's really and truly gone. And she did, eventually, in this, in much the same way. So the second paragraph is, oh no, I've already read it. "The power to rise comes from within. Devote yourself more now to making God your companion." Of course, if you lose a spouse, what you've lost is your companion. But God can be your companion. Is this easy? Oh, yeah, no, it isn't. Out of 1,000, one seeks God. Here's another. Sharing joy with the departed spouse. This was from 1975, so I have no context for the person. "I am so happy to hear that your feelings are so much more at peace on the subject of your husband's death. Remember, death doesn't really exist," Swami said to me once, and he just said it so, it wasn't exactly exasperated, but it was like it seemed so obvious to him, and why couldn't we understand? Nothing happens when you die. Nothing happens. He said, you just leave this place and go somewhere else, but nothing happens to you. Your surroundings shift, but you are just the same as you've always been, only you're somewhere else now. So he says, remember, death doesn't really exist. Have faith that he is with you and that you will be together again someday. A man of his spiritual sensitivity is surely in a much better place now and able also to send you his love and to help you. I was amused. I was thinking of 2 incidences of this. You'll see each other again. You'll be together again. This woman that I know, she was married for 60 years, And it wasn't the happiest of unions. And especially toward the end, it was a little tiresome for her. And she wasn't a woman of faith, but she was a volunteer in a hospital that was run by nuns. And they had great sympathy for her, and they reassured her that she would see her husband again. And she said, I think 60 years was quite enough. Like, maybe so, but not in exactly the same terms. So, but when we really love the person or are really happy, it's very reassuring to know that nothing's changed. A man of his spiritual sensitivity is surely in a much better place. What Swami said, what happens to us when we die, this world is heterogeneous in its vibrations, that there's light and there's shadow. When we go into the astral world, between our physical incarnations, we go into an atmosphere that is entirely homogeneous in its vibrations. So if we are spiritually minded, beauty-minded, refined in our consciousness, then we go into an atmosphere that just suits us perfectly. In fact, as Swami's advice to a woman that of this community who died of cancer, he sort of said to her before she died, we saw her, sat with her about 2 weeks or so before she died. He said, you're going to love the astral world so much. He said, don't become so distracted by how beautiful it is that you forget your search for God. Your incentive will not be strong because you will be so happy there. And he is able to send you his love and to help you here. Don't hold him down with sadness, but share with him your joy in mutually loving God and truth. In this way, you will be able to help each other. But that's one of the really important things to realize. Don't hold him down with your sadness. In our community of us, which is located about a half an hour outside the town of Assisi in Italy, it's a rural community, and there's this long rural road. And when Swami would stay in his house in that community a few months out of the year, and then he would be gone for a while and he would come back. And when he'd been away for a while, he came back, and I think he'd been away at that point for a couple of years perhaps, because he came back, and on the side of the road that we would go always on to go from the community to the town, there was a little shrine, a little sort of homemade shrine. And there was always fresh flowers on that shrine. So Swami said to one of the residents there, what is this? Oh, a young man was killed on that spot, and the death had been at least a year, maybe 2 years earlier. And the mother came every day or every few days and put fresh flowers on the shrine. Now, most people would say, oh, what devotion. Oh, what great love the mother had. Swami said, that poor man, the one who died, that poor man, she's just always grieving. All this time, she just can't let him go. Said it must be a terrible burden on his consciousness. And he said it's going to force him to repudiate her completely. Isn't that interesting? Just the opposite of what you would think. Because he had gone on. He wouldn't have died if it weren't in his soul's best interest. See, now we're stuck again with the karmic law, which is kind of a nuisance, isn't it? Here we are again with the karmic law, that he wouldn't have died if it wasn't exactly what his soul needed at that point to die. And instead of her continuing to support her son on the next stage of his journey, and she was his son because their souls had an affinity, and they had a karma they had to act out together. But as soon as that body dies, the mother-son relationship is entirely based on the physical bodies that you're in. And as soon as you're out of that physical body, your affinity and your love for each other can still be there, but mother-son, it's gone. Because son was that body, and that body is gone now. And her constant holding, you're my son, and I grieve for you, you're my son, and I grieve for you, he can feel it. And he needs to let go of this life. He needs to go on to his next reality of his mother is constantly mourning for him, he's forced to repudiate her. I mean, think of it like your child, you live in the USA and your child goes off to France to study. And, you know, they're just going off on a new adventure. And you call them every day and tell them how much you miss them and how miserable it is because you're not home. And it's just like after a while, the child stops picking up the phone because they have something else they have to do. And you're just constantly trying to turn them back to what they've gone on to do now. Is that love? You have to really ask the question, is that love? So these are important, very important lessons. You can be honest. I miss you. One of my friends whose husband died, he died suddenly, and she said, let's see, how did she put it? She said, he's still with me, and we can still talk to each other, but it was easier when he was in the body. Now that he's out of the body, she said, communication is more challenging. But he's still there and he's still with me just as much. It was a very sweet way to put it. It's more of a challenge. And that was just honest. That's what it was. So he says, don't hold him down with sadness as to why your husband should have left so young. It is not really helpful to ask that question. It's not helpful because how will you understand the answer? This is like when Vivekananda was asked, why did God create the world? Vivekananda said, the level of consciousness that asks the question is not capable of understanding the answer. The only way you can understand why God has done something is you have to be in his vibration. And when you're in his vibration, you have his perspective. And that's why deep meditation shifts us. We have much more of a divine perspective on everything. And that's where the transcendence and the freedom comes. Oh, I understand. So it is not really helpful to ask that question. Remember, karma rules us all. Ask rather, what can I do about it now? You know, instead of just sort of freezing at, I want to understand, that in itself is not the attitude that will bring understanding. You ask, what can I do about it now? You can do much by your love and by your loyalty to him, by your support spiritually, and by your prayers. Be joyful above all. This is the best thing you can do for him. See where the confusion comes, like my friend said, but if I stop mourning his absence, he'll really be gone. And so we get very caught between the human and the divine because he's gone on. Whoever we love, they've gone on. They're doing exactly what they should be doing. And the more we can rejoice with them, even though we may weep at the funeral. It's very challenging. This is from 2006. Swami says, death is nothing to fear. Swami says, I'm sorry I've been able to stop by to see you in person. This body can no longer get around as much as I might wish. By this time, Swami was really suffering the effects of old age. I understand that the time for your passing may now be very near. So I don't know who he's writing to, but he's writing to someone who's close to death. And he hasn't been able to go visit them, so he's writing to them. I wanted you to know that though I'm not with you in body, I'm very much there by your side in spirit and in consciousness. And then a lot of people who died in the context of Ananda had experiences of Swami's presence with them. I remember this one woman who was passing. I wasn't there, but this was told to me by the person who was. The woman had hardly been communicating for several days, and then she just woke up and said to my friend who was sitting with her, she said, Swamiji is very aware of everything we're doing. Just like that. She didn't. I'm not sure she spoke again, but it was just like, there it was. You know, in a more altered state and you feel it. Don't be afraid of what's to come. As you'll soon see for yourself, death is nothing to fear. Illness has its challenges, as you well know. Illness has its challenges, as you well know. At the moment of death itself, though, there's no pain at all. Rather, what you'll experience is a great release from all the pain and worries you've been dragging along. Master and all the great ones tell us repeatedly, death itself is a liberation. It's like we're confined, we're held, we're trapped, and then all of a sudden we're not. The movies do a good job of this now. The movies do a good job of having that spirit just rise up. It's the same actor, of course, but the physical body lies, and then they become this sort of translucent. But they really do a very good job of just showing what that release looks like. And I think it's very accurate, as far as I can tell. The near-death experiences often seem a lot like what they put in films. That's where it's all coming from. The next days, which means the few remaining days you have left in this incarnation, the next days are a wonderful opportunity for you. Enjoy them. Don't you love this? Swami's writing to this man who's dying. I think it's a man. This person who's dying, and he knows they're going to die in a few days. And you know, the common worldly attitude is, oh, I'm so sorry you're going, and you cling to the hands of your loved ones and you don't want to say goodbye. Swami says, these next days are a wonderful opportunity for you. Enjoy them. I just love it. What's day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. I'm finishing up this. This has been a long run or a short run. I don't know how old this person is. I've been playing this part for a long time. I've done it night after night, day after day, year after year, and now this is the last performance. It's just almost over, and I might as well just enjoy it. These days are a wonderful opportunity for you. Enjoy them. Leave those burdens behind you. And I love the way he says this. Relax away from them all. Relax away from them. That is really a very interesting thought. Relax away from them. You see, what we don't understand is it takes tremendous energy to keep this ego involved. And a lot of times in meditation, Master also talks like that. We relax. We think we have to try really hard, but it's actually the opposite. It's the ego that's always trying hard to hold its separate position. I think of those from the cartoons of my youth when they would have these diving bells that would go down into the water. And we know it would just be this little blobby thing in the picture cartoons or the television cartoons, and there'd be the submersible thing. Or you see in the war action films where you're down in the submarine, and always part of the action, I mean, I can't stand these movies because they're so claustrophobic, but so you're down in the submarine and somewhere, you know, something penetrates the wall and then the water is pouring in like this because the submarine has to have so much force because the ocean is pressing all the way around, and the submarine has to be super strong to keep the force of the ocean at bay. And the little submersible or the submarine, that's what the ego is. The ego has to work so hard to hold this thing in place, to know who I am and to be controlling this and all of these different things that we quite mistakenly think are our real duty in this world. We cling, we hold, we want, we fear. And what's really being asked of us is to just elevate, to transcend, to rest in the heart, to just attune ourselves to the divine and let the divine flow through us. So Swami says, these next days are going to be wonderful for you. Enjoy them. Relax. Relax away from them all. You're going to leave all your burdens behind you. Relax away from them all, which just means don't hold on. just let them go. It's so interesting in our society. My father, for the last 2 years of his life, was in a care facility because his brain stopped working for the last couple of years. And it was so interesting there because, you know, people, elders who couldn't care for themselves were there. It was we were very fortunate. It was a very nice place with a very nice staff. But you know that all the relatives would keep the elders surrounded by all the things that would remind them of the incarnation they were about to leave. You know, pictures of themselves when they were young, the husband, the home, the children, the grandchildren, you know, just envelop them in the opportunity to cling to that which was about to go away. And I mean, it was all well-meaning. And of course, the love that we share, if it was meant to say, this has been a wonderful life, and I'm just so grateful for it. A friend of mine who died relatively young, and he was a very strong, seemingly very healthy man. He ran 5 miles every day, and he developed a backache. And he went to the doctor, and it turned out he had stage 4 cancer in his entire spine, and bones were riddled with cancer. And that's why he had a backache. And he died in 2 weeks. He was absolutely wonderful. He was extremely worldly as a person, very, very worldly. Lots of money, loved his money. He was very sensually indulgent, all these things. But as soon as he heard he was going to die, he just said, and he said it repeatedly, it's been a great run. And it was just like, what more can I ask for? It's been a great run. What can I complain about? And he never complained. He just, okay, it's over. He proved himself to be, in truth, a very great yogi. He just put it down. And that's, you know, that's what's being asked of us. Just put it down. Swami says, relax away from all those burdens and pains. Just what a wonderful moment to realize, I just have a few more days. What do I want to do with those days? Swami says, relax away from all the pains and burdens. Absorb yourself in thoughts of the freedom and light that will soon be yours. You're very blessed to have lived the life you did. Those who have meditated and lived for God go to higher and beautiful realms when they depart from this earth. Isn't that wonderful? Now, the fact is, you know, our lives can end at any moment. So what are we thinking about? What are we thinking about when we fall asleep at night? Swami says, when you go to sleep at night, give back to God everything related to your little corner of the universe. And then when you wake up, if it's still there, be grateful and surprised. But let it go. Relax away from the burdens and pains. Isn't that beautiful? We're so fortunate to have lived the life we live, whatever it was. How beautiful. What a great adventure. God bless you.